Okay, so I'm very happy to have the opportunity to ask you a lot of questions. The reason why I was hoping that you would give me an interview is because you were in Iran just a few weeks ago, and given the fact that the war is now raging since about 10 days and uh, you know, open-ended in my view, despite the fact that President Trump just said that he thinks the war is ending soon. I don't think that that is necessarily what will happen, given the different perspectives of all the relevant forces involved. But I want to thank you very much for your time, and maybe we can start with your take on what you think is going on right now as we speak.
Sure. It's great to be with you. Well, let's just start off with, where the conflict is. I mean, I can talk about my experience there on the ground after that, but and some insights about, Iranian society and politics, which I think are important and sorely missed in the United States. But where the conflict is right now, I think it's at a very critical juncture right now politically for the United States, specifically for the Trump administration, but also for Iran, for the people, for society, I mean, what's happened now is the United States has engaged in a type of shock and awe campaign, air campaign, and they've done this. This is what the U.S. do. This is what their military is geared around, which is air campaigns, bombing, standoff munitions from a distance, not so much directly over the capital, but most of what the U.S. is firing is from a relatively safe distance. The U.S. has incurred record losses in terms of aircraft. The Yemen war from last year, the U.S. lost more aircraft, drones, and fighters in different ways than any other conflict in the modern era, at least in the last 30 years. But the same thing is the case now. They've incurred a lot of losses, but that's nothing compared to the losses the U.S. has incurred in terms of its bases around the Persian Gulf. And the U.S.'s whole military footprint is predicated on some assumptions of what the world used to be like. And one of those assumptions is that no country would dare to attack any U.S. base anywhere in the world for fear of incurring the wrath of the very powerful military that the United States has. And the that assumption has been shattered. The United States drew fire to multiple bases right around the Gulf Arab states, Kuwait. They have bases in Kuwait. They have bases in Bahrain, the UAE, Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman. They even have facilities in Oman and Qatar, Jordan as well. All of these were hit by Iran and immediately as well. So what that told us is that Iran was going through nuclear negotiations, uh, 3, 4 weeks ago, and with the full anticipation that they would fail. They were under no illusion, and so they were preparing for a U.S. attack. The U.S. has been threatening to strike them for upwards of a month, 5 weeks, by amassing naval assets in the Indian Ocean and around the Persian Gulf and mobilizing all sorts of different uh, air power and so forth, getting ready to attack. So Iran struck back, retaliated quickly after the U.S. and Israel launched an unprovoked, undeclared war of aggression. And they hit them hard. And so U.S. radar stations, all sorts of things, billions of dollars in damage. But not just that, it's thrown the entire security architecture of the Persian Gulf, of the Middle East, into question. And this is to say nothing about Iranian strikes on Israel. That's another sacred cow that's been shattered after October 7th, was this idea that nobody would dare to strike Israel for fear of incurring Israel's wrath. And Israel is a powerful military actor. They also have nuclear weapons, an undeclared arsenal of anything between 90 and 120 by various people's estimates. I've heard higher, but so there's always that sort of Damocles, which is dangled over the region. But Iran has shattered that once, twice. True Promise 1, 2, 3, True Promise 4, which we're seeing right now, what they call their Operation True Promise 4, has also shattered this idea that nobody would dare to strike Israel and strike them hard. Iranian missiles have devastated Israel so much so that the Israeli government has enacted heavy censorship laws on Israelis, but also imposed censorship laws on Western media reporting out of Israel. So they don't want to show the damage, especially damage to military facilities. This is a grave national security perilous threat. Just this information getting out is apparently terrible for the Israeli government. And the reason is because they have a problem as people wanting to leave Israel now. So the whole dream of Israel as the colonial settler state is that it's the safest place on earth for Jews to go, because the assumption is as the story goes, Jews have been persecuted and been evicted from so many different countries over history. Ergo, they required a homeland, and that's the underlying narrative of the Zionist project. And Israel is that homeland, and it's the safest place for Jews to go in the world. That's no longer a dream that can be sold anymore, and so people are fleeing Israel in droves. And the information coming out in the media is certainly not helping. The images isn't helping. So you have a major crisis, a major upheaval. But in reaction to this, the U.S. military and the Israeli military have gone into a type of scorched earth policy with attacking Iran, targeting civilian infrastructure, targeting civilian areas. So there's no compunction at all about target selection by the U.S. They regard this as total warfare, and the aim here is not to stop Iran's nuclear program, because they don't have one. This is a canard that has been rehashed over and over. They're not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. At least that's what the evidence shows. Even the U.S.'s own intelligence assessment has confirmed that on multiple occasions. So what is it? What's the threat? Well, we're told in January it was, Iran is massacring peaceful protesters. We must come to the aid of the Iranian people. So the American government, the Trump administration, virtue signaling about the welfare of Iranians as if they care. As we can see now, they don't care about Iranian people. That was just a lie, a theatrical performance by politicians, by our media, yeah, go ahead.
Scott Bessent said in a Senate hearing, that he called the aiding of the demonstrators and subsequent, violent activities of some of these people as economic statecraft, which is, an admission that this was a unrest fueled by the United States, maybe MI6, CIA, and Pompeo even put out a tweet saying that every demonstrator had a Mossad agent at his side. So, I mean, the real story obviously this was an attempt for regime change by the usual methods, and it failed. But, I think that the consequences now are, in the worst case, the Iran as a country could split into many ethnic parts, and then you would have terrorism and civil war and chaos. Likewise, the countries of the Gulf states are also potentially shattered because, they are not exactly viable states, because they have very small native populations and a lot of guest workers from Bangladesh, from India, from all kinds of places I mean, the whole life basis of all the nations in the region, Iran, Israel, the Gulf states, is shattered. I mean, is that worth the price of this terrible war, which should never have started?
I think if you ask that question to the Israeli government, they would say yes. Not only is it worth the price, this is their intention. Israel is quite happy. Israel doesn't necessarily care about the first world development of Gulf Arab states. They would like to control their resources at some point in the future. They would like to extract their wealth, but they really don't care about the societies. As you rightly pointed out, they're not natural states. You know, how many countries in the world are named after a family? Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's just on one level kind of ridiculous, but these are artifacts of the British Empire and European powers. So they're not real states, as you rightly point out. They don't have large native populations, particularly looking at UAE and Qatar as an example. Maybe Saudi Arabia has a larger native population, but still they rely on slave labor and Western middle management and expertise and engineering, skilled labor, and so forth. So, and they serve at the pleasure of the U.S. and the Western powers, and ultimately at Israel, because Israel could destroy any of these Gulf states at any moment if they choose, and nobody's going to do anything really about it, because all these Gulf states, their entire military and defense array are basically tied into U.S. procurement, operation systems, engineering systems. So they all really any of these states can't fire a bullet without permission from Washington. That's the sort of long and short of it. So, for Iran, the intention is what Scott Bessent revealed there is a longstanding policy of the U.S., which is total warfare, financial warfare, whereby you attack the currency of a country, you create a run on the currency, you force that country to sell its gold reserves, you force it to do anything to get their hands on foreign currency so that they can try to make their balance of payments, then you sanction them, then you embargo them, then you unleash the jackals, be they, Al Qaeda, jihadi fighters, or a color revolution, a Soros style color revolution. And if that doesn't work, you come in with hard power. This exact formula has been enacted in Venezuela. It's been enacted in Cuba, Libya, Syria, Iran, even Yugoslavia to a large degree, and many other Eastern European countries. So Scott Bessent is just basically taking the mask off that, the U.S. Treasury should be a department nested in the Pentagon. Okay, it's a department that serves an empire, and it's a militaristic. The Treasury Department is a militaristic department. It's got sanctions on hundreds of thousands of individuals globally. The U.S. Treasury, OFAC. So, and they want to paralyze governments, paralyze the states, sanction anybody that would help another country. The reason Venezuela got shut down before Christmas was because Venezuela was supplying oil to Cuba. And it was one of the last countries, besides China and all these other talking points, that there's an embargo on Cuba, longstanding sanctions and embargo, and Venezuela was assisting them. And they wanted to cut that off, as well as Mexico. But so nobody could help Cuba so that they could strangle the state, strangle the government, starve the people, and act collective punishment, like they did with Syria. Syria, they didn't steal their oil, they deployed ISIS to occupy their oil fields and to deprive Syria from having fuel while they economically strangle them and forcing them to buy their fuel back at exorbitant rates from terrorists, basically. So with Iran, the same formula has been enacted. It's been going for 47 years, ever since the Islamic Revolution. And now we're in this sort of hyper militaristic phase where the United States and Israel are trying to destroy the government, destroy society, attack the police, attack the local law enforcement, of hospitals, infrastructure. So to make it so the state can no longer govern, to assassinate all of their leaders, their religious leaders, their political leaders. And it's savage what the US is doing. And Iran has never attacked the United States. The justification for this in Washington from the likes of Marco Rubio and the various ne'er-do-wells that have, superglued themselves to Donald Trump is that, well, Iran has been chanting death to America, death to Israel for, 47 years, and we've had enough. So the snowflakes in Washington, the neocon snowflakes, can't handle it when someone's chanting death to America. It's not the government isn't standing up there leading death to America speeches, but it's said at mosques, it's said at rallies around the country. And there's a reason for it, because the United States overthrew, they orchestrated a coup against Iran in 1953, and they installed a fake U.S. monarch as a puppet, and he was a brutal dictator. That's why they had an Islamic revolution in 1979, overthrow the U.S. fake monarch, that dictator. So that's just one of many reasons, plus the sanctions, plus the assassinations. The United States has been torturing that country forever and trying to steal its resources and destroy it, basically. So, of course, there are people in that country that are going to chant death to America, just as there will be Americans that would be chanting the exact same thing if they were under the jackboot of some imperial power. Okay, most countries would have this natural opposition reaction. But the United States actually does met out death. They actually do murder. They do kill. Israel actually kills indiscriminately. They do kill civilians. Okay, the Iranians do not. Okay, the Iranians have reacted to an unprovoked war. So, but in the American mind, in our heavily propagandized American society, that's, someone threatening you is equal to someone actually killing you. It's bizarre. It's hard to get your head around, but that's the currency that Fox News and U.S. media that fuels our media, basically. And we're able to manufacture consent for some kind of a phantom enemy, despite the fact the enemy hasn't actually done anything to us.
Well, the last time there was any prospect of having some solution in the Middle East or Southwest Asia was around the Oslo Accord. But then that was ended with the Oslo Accord was never really implemented because it never got really into the phase of economic reconstruction, which could have saved the peace agreement. But that was then replaced by the so-called clean break, which was the idea that in the interest of Israel, one would get rid of every government in the region which they did not agree with. And in a certain sense, belatedly, you can see that now the United States is doing what Israel wants. And what is, I think, very worrisome is that the so-called Secretary of War, not Secretary of Peace or Defense, but of War, Pete Hegseth, is now using the same kind of biblical argumentation, which only certain very religious elements in Israel and in the religious right in the United States have. And could you comment on that? Because I think when religious arguments are entering some military conflict, there is no more rational basis.
No, so there's a few things there that you said to try to unpack. Let me figure out where to start. This speaks to the heart of a sort of a question that's posed in alternative media and alternative and political commentary and analytical circles, which is that there's a big debate argument. Is Israel the tail that wags the U.S. dog, or is Israel a beachhead for Anglo-American imperialism, projecting and helping to control Eurasia, basically, in that part of the globe? And a lot of people, flippant commentators, will want it to be one or the other. And people have these debates online. It's happening right now. They're saying, no, 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 it's not Israel. This is U.S. empire. What you're seeing is all about U.S. empire. It's not about Israel. The answer to that question is both. It is both. Israel began as a beachhead for Anglo and later American imperialism to help an unsinkable aircraft carrier, if you will, that assisted. So Israel was able to exist, was funded, was financed, was armed, and it played a certain role throughout the Cold War, and then afterwards, during the period you're talking about there, the clean break period there from the mid 1990s, when you start to see the very muscular and aggressive foreign policy being unveiled by the United States and its allies. And so, but then so Israel had a role there, and it could pursue its expansionist, its greater Israel objectives, so long as it served also the interests of Western empire. Okay, so it was a symbiotic relationship, but I will argue that over time, with the increased penetration of the Israeli lobby into the U.S. political system, and the infusion of unprecedented amounts of money. So I can't see anyone could make the argument that Israel is not steering U.S. foreign policy over the last 20, 25 years with the sheer amount of money that goes into the pockets of congressmen and senators and the president himself, in this case, Donald Trump, unprecedented amount, $250 million, and in total, 600 million into all Republican campaigns, including the president in the last election cycle. And then if you look at their corresponding voting and policies decisions and support, it corresponds perfectly to the interests of Israel and the Israeli lobby and the office of Benjamin Netanyahu himself. So you can't make the argument that the tail isn't wagging the dog, because it absolutely is. But the U.S. was still going to pursue its imperial uh, interests anyway. Okay, they're still going to maintain those postures anyway. It's just that the speed, the pace, and the scope of it. And you're seeing the Greater Israel Project right now unfold in the most violent way, whereby uh, they envision demilitarizing every single country in the region. They will be the sole superpower in the region, and that would give Israel an inordinate amount of power and influence over the global economy and global geopolitics, in the vein of a city state of the 21st century, powerful city state, an empire of sorts. So whether that's sustainable or realistic or not is we can debate that, but it's then you infuse the Christian Zionist element into that, and that has absolutely infected the command structure of the U.S. military, of course, U.S. politics, but the U.S. military itself, whereby the current, as you said, the current defense secretary, who the self-styled Secretary of War, as he calls himself, he gave a speech in 2018 at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, proselytizing for the rebuilding of Solomon's third temple. Okay, he is a member of the Red Heifer extremist fanatic religious cult. Okay, that's why he was selected by the Israeli lobby. So this is the other thing. The Israeli lobby handpicked every member of the U.S. cabinet in the Trump administration, and that process was managed by an Israeli operative, Howard Lutnick, and Jared Kushner, another Israeli operative. I say operative because they're working on behalf of a foreign country. And clearly, Jared Kushner is. That's why he front runs U.S. Middle East policy. Nobody ever voted for him. He wasn't confirmed by the Senate. He's the president's son-in-law. So it's a Game of Thrones type situation with the intermarriage of interests here. But that aside, Pete Hegseth was a weekend Fox News host 18 months ago. He never achieved anything in the military above the rank of major as a reservist. So he has no resume, no qualifications to be head of the $1.5 trillion military industrial complex of the U.S. empire. He certainly is not qualified for that. Why was he selected? He was selected by the Israeli lobby, by Miriam Adelson and the coterie of mega donors, the Ronald Lauders of the world, because of his religious fanaticism, because of the fact he's got Crusader, the Cross of Jerusalem, tattooed on his chest, as well as other tattoos that are Crusader iconography and slogans. That's why he was selected. It was because he was unqualified. He was young. He was unhinged, unstable, scandal-ridden, and a religious fanatic. So we have a religious fanatic in charge of the world's most powerful military, and in the command structure, Israeli organizations have been working to indoctrinate generals, admirals, other high-ranking officers over the last couple of decades, doing field trips to Israel, working with the IDF. They're encouraging the Christian Zionism, the end times belief system, because this suits Israel. So it is scary in a way because these are people that are telling our troops from the basic training level where they're recruiting them into the evangelical wing of the U.S. military. This is all documented, by the way, and telling them it's a holy war. That this war now is a holy war, and this war now against Iran will accelerate the coming of Jesus Christ, Armageddon, the great battle, nations pit against nations, and then the return of Jesus. That's happening. This is so well documented now. There's and likewise there's tens of thousands of official complaints that have been lodged to legal NGOs, taking complaints from active duty Marines and other U.S. soldiers complaining that this is happening and that they're being, marginalized within the military or passed over for promotion because they're not, quote, Christian enough, because they're not expressing their Christian nationalism enough. This is a huge problem within the U.S. military. So you pair that with what we're seeing here between the U.S., Trump, Israel, and Iran, it's positively frightening. So they would look at a nuclear Armageddon as some kind of a divine outcome. So, and the iconography of the Crusaders are on their symbols of those branches of the Air Force that are handling nuclear weapons. So, most countries, same people will look at that and say, that's crazy. But that's what we have in the United States right now. So that really should send chills down the spines of everybody. And many high-ranking U.S. Officers have been very outspoken against this, by the way. Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who's very prominent on the podcasting circuit, he has publicly come out, warning, raising the alarm about this, as have others. So, and Trump is cultivating, the Trump administration's cultivating this. They're encouraging this. They're bringing this into the Oval Office with these fanatical religious advisors like Paula White, laying prayer hands on Trump, almost treating him like a demigod, like he's ordained by God to bring on the end times. The Mike Huckabees of the world, they're all very giddy. They're all very excited about what they're seeing. They wanted this war for the longest period of time. So we've got the fanatical religious extremist wing that, quite frankly, you can put a cigarette paper between them and ISIS. It's the exact same doctrines, exact same mindset, yeah, exact same ideology, as well as Israeli Zionists, settler colonial Zionists as well. So we're just painting the landscape here of politics and religion, which, yeah.
I think, from 21st century to have the idea that biblical forecasts should determine military policy is sort of, I don't find the words to describe it. But, for many decades, it was clear that, at least to me and everybody who was thinking about Southwest Asia, that a war against Iran would always have the potential of going global because, Iran is in a very strategic position. It's part of the BRICS. It's part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's sitting in the middle of the Belt and Road Initiative corridors. It's sort of in the middle of the North-South transport corridor from Russia into reaching into India. So it's not an isolated country. And right now, it does not look as if, the Iranians will be defeated. It's hard to say, but they have clearly prepared for this war for a very long time. Analysts are making the point that they have only used their older missiles and drones, and that they still have a lot of the more modern hypersonic missiles. Then, the American and Israeli defenses were not so in shape either. Some of the SAR systems apparently have been destroyed. The radars are knocked out. So, what is if, indeed the Iranian military power would be able to penetrate the so-called Iron Dome more than expected? And, would there be the danger at a certain moment that Israel would use nuclear weapons? I think if that would happen, then we are in World War III. And I think that
Yes.
is one has to assume that hopefully it will not come to that, but it is not to be excluded. So I think we are really looking at an unbelievable danger right now.
Well, firstly, I would be very cautious in assuming that Iran has this powerful, military capabilities. They do have very good capabilities in missiles and drone tech, and also they have their own satellite, their own proprietary space programs, applications, surveillance, algorithms. But it's not to the scale that China or the U.S. or Russia have. They don't have that many assets in orbit to help to paint targets on the ground, not like the United States have. And they're not able to conceal all of their military assets. They have lost a large portion of their navy. That's going to make it very difficult for them to even guard or patrol their ports. It's opening up areas to possible invasion on the Iranian coast. It's a big country, and the U.S. and Israel are banking on the fact that if they can degrade the Iranian Navy, the Iranian Air Force, which has also probably incurred huge losses, um, and also their missile program has finite resources, as does their drone program. So if they're not able to defend their borders or able to put down these sectarian rebellions from these guerrilla factions backed by the CIA and the British and the Israelis, then they're going to have problems. They're going to have problems keeping their country together, and they're fighting against an enemy that has unlimited resources, relatively speaking. U.S. dollar funded operations are relatively unlimited, at least for a while. They'll be for many years. So that's a hell of a thing to go against. And um, Iran does have the ability to fire more missiles, but for how long and at what cost? Because the other thing with wargaming is previous wargaming, even on this particular war, the U.S. ran wargaming exercise, most expensive exercise, the Millennium Challenge in 2002, and it came out very badly for the U.S. on the wargaming, but they didn't factor in the variable that in 2026 or today, that there would be the new doctrine, which is the United States has adopted the Israeli doctrines, the Dahiya doctrine, which means that they have no compunction in killing civilians. So that the world has demonstrated after October 7th and now the carpet bombing of Lebanon that nobody will touch or restrain the state of Israel if it targets civilians in densely populated urban areas. These are all things that we constructed whole international frameworks to prevent. So there wouldn't be another Dresden. So there wouldn't be another Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there wouldn't be another Pyongyang during the Korean War. That type of scorched earth, Operation Rolling Thunder with Henry Kissinger and Richard Lyndon Baines Johnson and Nixon is another example of that as well. But that's now confounded the entire war game scenario because countries will capitulate just out of attrition if you hit and start killing masses of civilians from the air. And if Israel, as you mentioned, deploys a tactical nuclear weapon, which I would not put it past them, They're probably very close to doing that right now, or worse, a strategic nuclear warhead. What is the world going to do? Nothing. Nothing. No power will do anything. If the US did it, that would have much bigger ramifications if the US deployed that weapon against the Iranians, because that would completely, I think, break the United Nations. That would completely transform the Gulf Arab orientation with America internationally. America would become a pariah, and it would rapidly break down a lot of support that America and cooperation that it's had, even with its European allies. But if Israel does it, there'll be nobody will do anything. There might be some voices here and there from certain governments like Spain or a few other conscientious governments. Maybe Norway might protest it. But overall, most, and maybe the global south and BRICS countries, but overall, there'll be no pushback at all if Israel does that. And that sends a very powerful message, which is that who is the superpower? Is the superpower the United States, or is the superpower Israel? That's a good question, because Marco Rubio was on record this past week saying that the United States had no choice but to strike first, because Israel was going to strike first. So what he's admitting there is the U.S. has no agency when it comes to restraining Israel. And worse than that, they must act in concert with them in an unprovoked, undeclared war of aggression. Now that's extraordinary, but that's the real politic of it. Who's the superpower, and who is controlling who? That argument alone shows that the tail is indeed wagging the dog, but there's huge consequences for that. So for Iran, uh, in a conventional war, just to survive, they can declare victory. If Trump backs off, as the U.S. is making noises now because Israel's running low on interceptor missiles. So Trump wants to say, declare a victory and then have a pause. They need time to rearm. But if they do that, if there is a pause, but Iran hasn't agreed to a ceasefire either. So we don't know. This could escalate into the next level. But either way, even if all parties down-tooled and so had a pause or a ceasefire agreement, that doesn't mean this war is over. It means that this will be the first phase of multiple phases, and the United States and Israel and its allies are determined to crush the country of Iran, to destroy it like they did with Iraq, to make it inoperable, to make it so it has nothing, to create waves of refugees from Iran into Europe that will help to fuel the far right anger about immigration. And again, this whole system, the feedback loops start to feed in on themselves, and that's the current climate we have anyway politically, which reinforces more foreign intervention against Muslim countries. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can see you're arguing in the present circumstances, but if you look at the longer arc of history, ever since the United States started the interventionist wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, it didn't go so well. Now the Ukraine war is also de facto lost.
It didn't go well for those countries, but it went well for the U.S. in terms of achieving their imperial goals, and for Israel in terms of eliminating any peer competitors in the region. So it was bad politically to certain people, but for the power structure, it went very well, and they profited off it as well.
Oh, you know, in one sense you could say that, but on the other side, the entire policy after the Cold War, trying to establish an unipolar world, did not succeed. You had a blowback which was gigantic. You have now, as a result of that effort to establish a unipolar world, the global south, which de facto is 85% of the world population, they have decided that with the help of China, they will try to develop a new economic system whereby they can overcome 500 years of colonialism. And that, in a certain sense, is the longer trend. And if you compare, for example, the economic power of the BRICS, despite all problems, these are countries who have growth rates: China 5%, India 6%, Indonesia, all of these countries are rising, while the United States economy is, entirely military industrial complex. But look at the infrastructure, look at the living standard of the people, look at the gap between rich and poor. I don't think the United States has been the winner at all. It may be a situation where right now the military power is still, very, very strong. The US has more than 800 bases around the world. They have a certain grip over the countries where they are because of their bases. But does that mean that they have the hearts of the people in these countries? No. You can say that in that sense, China, which has been helping these countries to develop infrastructure, industrial centers, bridges, trains, and so forth, in one sense, the power dynamic has already shifted to the global south. And, I think that this present situation, I mean, look, if you negotiate several times and then at the same time everybody can see you are only using that time to prepare a military attack, then diplomacy is out of the window. Nobody will trust you anymore after that. So I think that there is in my view, there is more an undefined period where it's not yet quite clear. Will this lead to the end of the world? It could. Or is it possible to even gain the United States back to some reasonable policy? Because I don't think that the United States can be left out any equation in the future. And the American people are not evil people.
From a moral point of view, I understand your argument. And from a global South point of view, from a moral point of view, I understand your argument that the United States has lost, hearts and minds, public opinion, global opinion turning against the U.S. But from the Washington perspective, they are still the unipolar hegemon. They might, you can make economic arguments about trends and so forth, but that unipolar hegemon has the military might, the nuclear arsenal, and the ruthlessness, along with its partner Israel and its other allies, to use that power to wreck the economies of the BRICS nations, to destroy the political economies of those nations. And what we see in the Middle East, what we see, Gaza is a perfect example, is that nobody, not anybody in BRICS, no one in the global South, had the power or the ability to do anything to restrain an ongoing genocide, which was broadcast in front of our eyes for two and a half years now. So, and the United States has shown it has the power to flip governments. It just enacted a coup in Honduras, removed the left-wing government, installed a far-right government. It removed the leader of Venezuela right in front of everybody, and nobody did anything. It seizes their tankers and stole their oil and stealing Russian tankers on the high seas, and nobody can do anything. And let me finish. And tariff wars, that this ridiculous punitive using tariffs like sanctions. There's been no pushback at all, and most countries have capitulated to this regime. So the U.S., while it might not be in the right, it might not have the hearts and minds, it is still the unipolar hegemon, and it's now going for broke in this late stage empire period, and it has the potential to set all of these countries back if it so chooses through either a world war or just knocking them off one by one, and then maybe having a power sharing arrangement with China and Russia in the future. But the global South is pretty inert when it comes to. I mean, they flipped Argentina. That's a pro-U.S. Zionist leader in Milei. They have a former grandson of a Nazi SS commander, I think, in Chile. They will try to flip the government in Colombia. They will do the same in Nicaragua. They will do the same in Cuba and Mexico at the very end. Okay, that's half the global South there, and Africa will not be able to withstand the onslaught once the heavy hand comes to Africa of Western imperialism. So I'm just saying.
Let me
I'm with you. I'm with you morally. I'm with you with the economic trends and arguments, but we have this problem, which is that this is an empire that doesn't feel compelled to restrain itself when it comes to killing people or imposing collective punishment, starving, or siege warfare.
Well,
And
let
so
me
it can do a lot of damage in this period.
obviously it does, but let me make two other arguments. One is that China, when it was pushed against the wall with the tariffs, used its control over rare earths and the tariffs stopped. So it's not true that there is no country who could stand up to the United States.
Well, for now, but if the U.S. launched a nuclear strike against China, China does not have a mad doctrine. Russia and the U.S. do. So there is an implicit understanding. If the United States wanted to get more aggressive with China later, there's very few countries that would be able to stop them, and China would not be able to stop them either.
It would
And
be
it would be devastating for China. They could take out the Chinese government if they so choose. They could, and China will not be able to do anything about it. I think it would create chaos in China, and the U.S. knows that it comes down to who is more ruthless and who's willing to stop them. That's what it ultimately that in realism and Warcraft, and that's what it comes down to.
realism also should take into account social and cultural factors. And I think
Of course, yeah.
leaving that out of the equation, because not only is the
In a civilized world, yes,
no, no, no.
but is this a civilized is it a civilized world?
Wait a
That's the
second, let
question.
me make my
Yeah.
argument. My argument is that, if you look at the flowback after the attempt to create an unipolar world, it is gigantic. And, the reputation of the West, the collective West, has has suffered tremendously. The fact that the international law has been declared defunct by President Trump has not gone unnoticed. A lot of countries are considering that. Furthermore, the Epstein scandal has added to the understanding that the mindset of those people who are using little girls and even children for their depraved behavior is the same mindset what caused the genocide in Gaza. All of these factors are being evaluated all over the world. So I'm saying that we are in a transformation which is much more open, because if one only looks at the mere military power, you would tend to become depressed and you give up and you become pessimistic. But I don't think that that is the situation right now, because I believe that the majority of the world population is motivated by completely different ideas. And it is only, in one sense, a dying class of the Epstein class, it's called. So I think we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater, because then you become inactive and you don't think about anymore about a vision which could bring humanity out of this crisis.
Mm. Well, it's not a question of I'm inactive, but I'm also realistic, and I can entertain what you just said there. And on a parallel track, I can also, realize the absolute clear and present danger of the United States is still the global economic superpower. The total amount of dollars in reserve and in circulation, it dwarfs the BRICS countries. So it is still, while it's losing, the U.S. dollar is losing volume in terms of total transactions. It is still the largest, most liquid form of settlement,
Let me ask you
uh,
a question.
and for arbitrage between currencies. Okay, that's why the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. That's where the U.S. ultimately has its power. It's not military. It leads with economic financial preponderance,
Okay,
and the military backs up the financial preponderance. So you understand that, we all understand that. But my what I'm saying is that is still a system that is in place, and that ultimately is where the U.S. can wield unrivaled influence, leverage, power, intimidation, like a global mafia. And so we can't extricate ourselves from the system. We have to kind of understand it, acknowledge it, realize it, because the global South. How many global South countries have sanctioned the United States? None. How
Well,
many BRICS countries have sanctioned the U.S.? None. They can't. They won't.
let's acknowledge
So,
a lot of what you say is obviously the case. But what is your perspective to stop Armageddon and to get world history into a better period?
well, I've been dedicating my adult life to educating people and raising these issues, raising the alarm, showing people the truth, so that they have a accurate view of the world, an accurate portrayal of the world. This is why I do what I do every day. It's why when I'm able to travel to places like Iran, to show people that there are real people living here.
Actually, I did
People,
not want to miss the opportunity to ask you for your experience in Iran, since you have been there just shortly ago. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your observations were?
sure. Well, I'll say firstly that, the reason I went, well, I applied for accreditation with their Ministry of Media Information, and my credentials were accepted. And this came at a time when the U.S. issued the warning not to travel to Iran and ordered all Americans to leave the country. This was when that order came in was late January, and then I realized there was an opportunity to go, but I knew that the U.S. could attack, that the naval assets were already being, or the Armada was already being assembled in the region, and that attack could happen at any moment. So I knew there was limited time to go. So I was able to get there and had a visa for 1 week and was able to do some media coverage and meet people, talk to people, report from there for a week to understand what the true, a few things, what really happened with the protests. I needed to have confirmation for myself as much as possible, because there were lies injected into our Western media that there were 30,000 or 50,000 Iranians were slaughtered by the regime in these democratic protests. Of course, I can say categorically 100% that those are all fabricated, total lies. Quite the opposite, in fact. And those of you who followed that part of the story know the facts that have been released. And there were 3,117 people died, the majority of which were Iranian civilians, police officers, Bashid, local law enforcement, EMS, first responders, bystanders were killed by violent provocateurs who were being financed, armed, and directed by foreign intelligence services from the U.S., Israel, and likely the British as well would have been involved, as well as maybe another country. But so, that lie is important, because that lie about the regime, about the supreme leader being a terrorist leader, this undergirds the entire Western posture against Iran, because we're well informed. We have some geopolitical perspective. Okay, we understand covert operations, all these things that aren't talked about in the mainstream media. But for moderates in America, they might be against the war. A populist MAGA supporter who voted for Trump because he was no new wars president, they might be against the war even now, or the average liberal who's moderate, they might be against the intervention. They don't like Trump, but they'll say, well, I don't like the war, but it's a brutal, evil terrorist regime, and it's good that the leader has been killed. Just exact same mentality and methodology was used with Saddam Hussein, with Muammar Gaddafi, with Slobodan Milosevic, with Bashar al-Assad, and the list goes on. So this lie of the atrocity propaganda is used to justify it's used to justify the genocide in Gaza. They said Hamas beheaded 40 beheaded babies, all these various atrocity lies, which Donald Trump himself is still repeating, by the way, just yesterday. He's repeating, he said the Iranians beheaded babies. Our president said that. So, but this creates the moral justification. This is the background, this is the backdrop for the war. So we as the chattering classes in America could say, well, I don't support this war. No more regime change wars, the Tulsi Gabbard tropes. But at the end of the day, America will feel morally okay that we killed their supreme leader and then his son and his son's son, because it's a brutal terrorist government and they're the number one state sponsor of terror, etc. So me going to Iran it's about deconstructing and debunking propaganda as much as anything, because I'm a witness. I'm a white Western man. So I come back and I say, or I videoed from there saying, I'm out here with 2 million Iranians at a pro-government national rally days after the U.S. is threatening to bomb the country, which showed everybody, should show everybody that the regime isn't on its last legs. They're not about to buckle like a house of cards. This is the same propaganda technique that they used against Russia. That the Russians are collapsing. The Russians are running out of ammo. The Russian military is they're on its last legs. Putin is hiding. He's dying of cancer. We're told this for 3 straight years. And that Ukraine is the valiant Ukrainians are winning, and there's 1 million Russian dead soldiers, and no Ukrainians have been killed, and we just need some new weapons for Zelensky, and we're gonna win this next month. So it's the exact same propaganda campaign. And so I was able to testify and say, look, the more you threaten this country, the more you amass military assets, the more cohesive the country becomes, the more solidarity you see on the ground. Why is that? How many governments in Europe where the leadership can get 2 million people on the street like this? No Western government can do that in support of the government on a snap. And Iran can. Why? If you study, and I learned a lot more about the nature of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and 80. The people in that country are very proud of what they've achieved as a people, and it's an Islamic Republic. The name, it's in the name, Republic. Has a faith and religion at the center of that, but it's very conservative, culturally conservative country, and it's a republic. Every single position is elected.
I think
Every single
it's
position.
a
Yeah,
civilizational state. They are a
as well. Yes.
proud history of 3,000 or more years, and they, contributed to the development of universal history at various points, and that is deep in the identity of the people. I mean, I have found the Persians, you can say, the Iranians, much more cultured than many people in the West. And I think that is, for example, the supreme leader who was just killed, he spoke 4 or 5 languages. He was reading the classics in that languages, French, English. You know, I don't know many leaders of the Western governments who have a likewise cultural background. So I think it's important that we also make an effort to educate people in the West more about the legitimacy of these other cultures, because some of these cultures are really ancient civilizations, and they have a completely different way of looking. And I think the West must give up the idea that what we impose in terms of Western values is superior. As a matter of fact, we have lost the way. We had also great cultures. America, for example, you have your 250th anniversary of the American Declaration of Independence, the American Revolution. That was a high point of American culture, but how many Americans even know what this was all about? What was the origin of the American Republic? So I think we have to develop a better idea of the actual dialogue among civilizations, because in my view, the only way how we will ever get out of this idea of solving conflicts by force, military or otherwise, economic or whatever, is we have to become more civilized. And the dialogue of civilizations is what must follow whenever this conflict hopefully comes to an end, because we have to become human again. We can't have this kind of barbaric world. Nobody will outlive this.
Just on that point, I think it's important to understand that Iran is a civilizational state, like China, like India, like Russia to a large degree. But the United States is not a civilizational state. So Some Americans who are educated can understand that, appreciate that concept, but your average American uh, will it's not going to resonate as much. What should resonate, and this is the important argument I'm going to make, is that uh, Iran, there is no pure Persian. There's they use the term Persian, but at this point in history, everybody is intermarried or multi-ethnic in Iran. Everybody is part Arab, part Turk, part Kurdish, part Pakistani, part Azeri,
I mean, the United
part
States used to be called a melting pot.
yes, I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that. And part Baluchi. Okay. But they're united under Iranian national identity. Okay, so it's a republic. So if you assassinate the leader of Iran, the people are going to unite under the national banner. They're not pure ethnic. They're all mixed, but they identify as Iranian. And just like if China or Russia, there's a war or some country and they assassinated the U.S. president, they killed the U.S. leadership and they bombed the U.S. Capitol and they bombed some schools. Do you think, and there was a color revolution that was fomented from the outside. Do you think Americans are going to suddenly rise up to overthrow their republic? No, they're going to galvanize, and there's going to be massive solidarity, and they're going to come out fighting for the republic under the flag, the stars and stripes. It's exactly the same in Iran. If Americans could get this through their head, that America is a multi-ethnic country, as you said, a melting pot. So is Iran, smaller one, but it still is in a Central Asian or Middle Eastern context. But so, what do people identify with America? They identify with the Constitution. They identify with the Bill of Rights. They identify that's the mortar that holds the country together. The same thing in Iran. They have a constitution. They have a system, albeit has a major religious component in it. But Americans need to appreciate that that is a very similar system fundamentally on many levels as the American system. But yet we're mischaracterizing it, fetishizing it as this sort of terrorist state. It's unbelievable how wrong the American propagandized characterization of Iran is, to the point where it has to be that way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to back the vicious, violent attacks and the bombing and the slaughtering of Iranians by U.S. military, by Pete Hegseth. We need to mischaracterize it. The propaganda is essential to make that happen. But we can't appreciate the qualities in that society that we have ourselves. That's the core of the problem. That's one of the messages I'm trying to get across to people, from my experience, and just to explain some of these little things that I hopefully will contextualize it enough that maybe people can understand that what they're looking at there isn't so different. But it's an uphill battle. It's not anything it's not a battle that I ever expect to win, quite frankly. But we do what we can. I think if collectively we all do a little bit collectively, I think we can, we have a chance to move things in a better, positive direction. But it is it is an uphill battle, in America, especially right now.
Well, I'm sitting in Germany and it's not much better here. So, anyway, I want to thank you very much for your insights. I do not agree with every point you said, but a lot of what you said resonates, obviously. And I think what you are saying is hopefully waking up people so that they start to become a little bit more courageous and don't leave events to those in power, because that could end civilization. I'm really extremely concerned that that option must be avoided, because we would lose everything. Everything human beings
Of
ever
course.
fighting for would be forgotten, and nobody would be there to investigate why. So thank you
Yeah.
very much for your answering my questions and giving us your insight.
My pleasure. And then you can see our work, our investigations into these and other issues at 21stcenturywire.com. That's my website. We've been going since 2009. and you'll find something very insightful. I think everybody will find material on there. We put out investigations on a daily basis, and we also have weekly podcasts as well, discussing these
maybe we can,
issues.
exchange our views more often. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, till soon. Bye bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.